beautiful listeners, and welcome back to Reading Light, a podcast shining light on book topics and discussions, subjects, actual books, rambles. You know, it's a whole thing over here. We're really kind of doing whatever. Welcome to episode 3, I believe this is. If that is wrong, ignore that then maybe. I don't know. I think it is. But welcome back. I hope you all are having a good time. How's everyone doing? We're getting into the summer, which is kind of exciting. There's, I'm not one to have, much plans going on. But we got some good movies coming out. That is definitely something I have considered maybe sneaking in some movie episodes into this. I know we talk about books here, but I am someone who has a lot of media interest, but we'll keep it with books for now. But yeah, like the movies coming out and stuff. What are we reading? Is anyone reading anything fun? I'm still working on that police procedural book that I'm reading. It's really good. I think I'm going to dive more into mysteries after it. I think that is I'm really kind of got a hook on them. It's really keeping you, it's so cliche to say, but it's like, man, I want to keep reading them just so I know, I want to know the ending. Just like, I want the mystery to be solved. Like, you hook me on that, and of course now I want to finish it. So I am volleyed, I guess, for that propaganda or whatever. It's not propaganda, but you know what I mean. They're kind of getting me. I used to not be a mysteries person at all. I used to never get the appeal. I knew my grandmother read them all the time. That was the main thing she read, or at least got from the library, from what I remember. But there was never really my thing. And maybe that was just me trying to be not like everyone else. Don't like mysteries. Who wants to read mysteries? That's so dumb, especially. Even though I was reading some, I feel like I kind of got not tricked into it, but there were definitely books where I read where I felt I didn't know I was reading a mystery, which maybe that sounds stupid, but I think specifically of the series of unfortunate events. That was, I guess, technically a mystery, which I think maybe that sounds crazy, but that was a mystery. Or it had mysterious elements. I don't know. So maybe I was kind of tricked into reading mystery. So I guess I can't say I was totally anti them, but I wasn't seeking them out in the traditional sense or whatever. But, I do say this, but then I think in the last episode I talked about Scooby-Doo mysteries I was reading. So maybe I am just getting everything mixed up in my head. So, but anyways, long story short, I'm in them now. I'm pretty intrigued by it, and I kind of like it because, you don't have to get super invested in the characters, their backgrounds and stuff. Their dynamics are pretty interesting, but you don't have to get super crazy into them. And you can it kind of reminds me of, obviously, watching a cop show, one of those cop, Law and Order or something along those lines. And, I'm just here for 45 minutes of interesting drama and seeing the killer get caught, that kind of thing. So really cool though. It's been really fun. So I hope you all are reading some good stuff. Please always feel free to let me know. I am curious. And I'm always looking for book recommendations too. Anything of the sorts. I'm always interested. I'm always curious. There's always new stuff coming up. And I try to want to get more narrow, more sophisticated perhaps with my reading ideas, but also at the same time, catch me rereading YA books from high school or something, because I'm not immune to a fun book, okay? Jot that down. You may quote me on that. I'm not immune to it, so it's kind of all over the place. But anyways, well, I guess I shouldn't ramble so much like that, but I guess I should get into more of today's episode or such. But I wanted to try to at least give more of a sort of introduction and kind of a ease into episodes, makes it feel less like I'm doing a high school presentation on a subject. I want it to be more casual and more relaxed. But anyways, I should get into the topic of today's episode. If you've read the title, you've clearly understood kind of where we're going with this, because today's episode is about genres. So I'm getting more into the more specifics of books, less like my my last couple episodes were kind of more just on, I guess, reading in general and kind of the situations surrounding it. Whereas this one is going to be more, I'm getting into those books. We're diving in, sort of. We're diving into genres, but we're getting the meat of the idea of books, maybe? I don't think that's a proper sentence to say, but anyways, the whole topic is genres I avoid, but I'm gonna hopefully try. I say I want to try in the title, but I will hopefully try. This is not an episode for me to sit here for 30 minutes just completely terrorizing a genre or bashing it or discrediting it or acting like it's not good in any way. But I do have, some reluctance around some things. I just went on a whole thing about mysteries and how I was pretty much avoidant on that, at least from my perspective. But maybe at the time it wasn't that crazy, but I definitely did have some, I guess, biases too and stuff. And just, there's things you look for in books. And maybe what I find with these books is not always like what I'm looking for. I don't want to completely say I'm completely turned off of all of these. I'm definitely not, I'm not completely just avoidant and I'm not completely shut down to stuff. But there are just some genres out there that I don't know if I can grasp my head around. Not that, like I said, they're bad or anything. It's just maybe I don't have the palate for it. I think there's definitely it's kind of like movies. People have certain palettes for what they want. There are people who are more inclined to go sit through Oscar-nominated 3 hours of, drama. Then there are some people who are just like, I want an hour and 30 minutes of horror. So I guess it's kind of like that. But we'll dive into it. Maybe as I break down the genres and stuff, you'll get a better idea for what I'm kind of feeling about, kind of talking about. But to start it off, the first genre on here is high fantasy. I did mention, I believe in a previous episode, that I am open more now to fantasy. And that has come through my time typically Book Talk. When I got into Book Talk in 2020, 2021, I definitely found myself more intrigued by fantasy. I read, of course I read some fantasy as a kid because obviously the Percy Jackson books I would consider to be obviously kind of fantasy. They're more mythological, but they fall under, I think, that broader category of, because fantasy has a lot of subsections within it. And then I have also read Harry Potter, of course, another pretty big fantasy. It is, it does hold some real world counterpart kind of things. It does fall under another area of fantasy, which, by the way, I did not know how much goes into fantasy until I took my class on children's literature. It goes so crazy. And that's how I learned the term high fantasy and really started to understand what I did and didn't like. So big shout out to that class for kind of breaking it down. But I would say I'm better with regular kind of low fantasy for the most part. It really has to be a good great concept. It can be complex but not super overwhelming. And if it is going to be, I need something to latch onto. So I think of when I talk about this, you may think that ACOTAR is high fantasy. And I think there are some elements that definitely kind of lend itself to that. I'm not an expert, obviously, in genres, so I might get them a little skewed and mistaken, especially as I go through the specifics of fantasy like this. But I need kind of something that I know I'm reading for or latching to. And for me, that's romance. I'm a big more I'll watch action, but I want there to be some elements of romance as something I can I guess kind of I said, latch onto, cling to, and really kind of focus on and use that as a way to follow through of the politics and the world building of the situation. That's just my own preference, and I think it's because romance is such a genre that I am so familiar with and can really really dive into in any case or whatever. So I'm not against super specific crazy fantasy stuff, but I need something to read for. I need that guidance. I need that person there who's gonna just take me along with it. So I'm definitely not opposed to giving it a try. I'll give any kind of fantasy a try. I've definitely read pretty high fantasy books. As I kind of mentioned, you've kind of got an idea for like what I've read, but I get a little nervous about diving into them. And even if we talk about like low fantasy or realistic fantasy, I get a little nervous because it does take you so long to, or maybe this is only my case. I guess I shouldn't speak for everyone when I say it takes so long. In my case, it can take pretty long for me to really kind of understand where we're at in the world and really get an idea for the logo, like the lingo, the concepts, the politics, the idea, the structure, the characters, even like it. There can sometimes be a lot to try to like visualize in your head at once, so it gets overwhelming. It quite honestly, it can be overwhelming, and it can be difficult for me to follow, especially. But it is still obviously, it's a great genre and it's a great escapism. I can't knock it for that by any means, of course. It's fun. It's fun. Once you get into it, it's fun. So I'll still read fantasy somewhat, but I think that high stuff is something that I need to just get over my fear, maybe. Get over my fear. As I work now into my next category, we're taking kind of a 180 because now my next couple points are about nonfiction specifically. Look, I am not opposed to nonfiction. I used to be super like, who would read that? Why would you want to read that? Seems like, I hate to call it boring, but I did used to be so like stuck up about it almost. Like, who would want to read nonfiction? What's the point of that? Like, don't you want to have fun? Which is so stupid because now I've grown up and I've read quite a bit of nonfiction, and really the key is to find topics that interest you. You just got to find some sort of subject. For example, I think one book that really turned me on like nonfiction was it was called Bad Blood, and it was written by the reporter who basically exposed Theranos for being a fraud. And so he wrote an entire book about it, about what was going on, how he was approached to start exposing Theranos, what happens, that. But I was already like interested in that as a topic and was already super inclined to learn about that. So it was kind of a natural fit that I would then go to read this book. The same thing kind of goes for true crime. I do like reading some true crime books. It does get a little tricky. I do sometimes worry about a line with any true crime content now that I'm consuming. It can get a little tricky. It's hard to get into, but I don't, it is kind of, you got to be careful, I guess, with what you're reading and stuff. But when I was younger, though, I was just consuming it all left and right. So some of the books I read, it's up in arms in that. But I do like reading that a bit. I enjoyed, such as I've read a couple books on Bundy, as I think I've mentioned in a previous one. I've read a couple books on the Zodiac Killer, that sort of thing. That stuff is it's fascinating, and I do like that nonfiction, but I already like those subjects, so of course I would latch onto it. All that to say, now that I've completely gone off on nonfiction rants, the specific nonfiction genres that I'm kind of hesitant on are, first off, is self-help. I hear a lot about self-help stuff. I just read a comment the other day, I think on Instagram Reels, that was about this person was like, I have to stop consuming self-help podcasts, which I did not realize there was so much like self-help stuff out there and like trying to better yourself and do all this. And I was aware of the books and stuff because I feel like they're always like out there in a way. And they're always like kind of being like shoved almost in your face, or like you hear about it from people who maybe are into it, maybe not. It is a little, it is a little iffy. I specifically remember the craze around the girl washer Facebook, and I just know when I said those words, someone listening to this is gonna scream, like, because that book, from what I understand, is it's a I don't it's hard to explain. I have heard that that book has sent people on some crazy spirals, and like kind of maybe I want to say had like a chokehold on I want to say like millennials back in that time. That's from my understanding. That's from an outsider's perspective. I was not there. I was there, but I wasn't super invested in this idea of the self-help book. But I remember that one, and ever since hearing people are like it was like a crazy thing. It was kind of like the girl bossing kind of period of time almost. So I'm a little hesitant on self-help nonfiction. It's so I guess, of course, I want to be better. Of course, we all want to better ourselves, but it's also can seem a little highbrow, a little, oh, you're not reading that kind of thing. Like, it just seems like maybe that's a genre for people in a different tax bracket in a way, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe not. I would be open to it. If I find one out there that really speaks to me, I would definitely go into it with an open mind and really dive forward. And I'm sure, just like any other kind of genre, there's probably subgenres of self-help. So there's probably specific areas that maybe appeal to me and could be a little bit, actually useful perhaps. But anyways, moving on now to the next sub nonfiction group that I'm a little hesitant on, and that's essays. I don't know what it is about essay nonfiction, but it feels odd. I don't know. It's kind of unappealing. I don't know if I get the concept of just writing a bunch of essays and publishing it. Yeah, I don't know. This one I have less opinions on than the self-help one. It is just something where I've seen this and I've been recommended various types of essay nonfiction books, but I just can't, like, I look at it and I'm like, this also feels a little maybe pretentious in a way, or like something other people are doing. It's hard to explain, but it certainly has not been something I have felt too inclined to adventure out to. That being said, though, it's not that like I haven't heard of very intriguing sort of essay books written by people who I think have very interesting experience. I guess maybe that's also part of it, is you kind of need the experience, I think, in a way, for, I guess maybe that'll go for it. Obviously, that goes for any nonfiction. You need to have some experience and expertise behind your name to be writing this and selling it. But I think essays specifically, kind of like memoirs, you need to like live a life. You can't be putting out memoirs at like 22 and being like, oh, here. And it's like, unless you were like a baby and you remember everything from that, whatever. But it's kind of that kind of situation. But maybe not. I don't know. Essays just, I don't know if they get me yet. They may not get me yet. And maybe this will change. Maybe I will become someone who gets consumed by nonfiction, and this all will become super outdated, and I'll come back on here in like 2 years and be like, just kidding. Here's my recommendation. So anyways, we're going to leave now nonfiction behind, because I might be digging myself into a hole with that one, and maybe everyone will come at me and hate me for that one, and that's my bad. Anyways, the next few genres, I guess the rest of the genres kind of on my list, are no longer nonfiction, as I've probably hinted at that we're moving away from that. But the next one is poetry. This probably seems super decisive, and I'm so sorry to anyone who is really into poetry. And I know there's a lot of people who have some really strong opinions on it. There's people who, they constantly read poetry books. It's like their go-to thing. They love reading it. They're very fascinating. And I love that for you so freaking much. I am just so scared of them. I shouldn't say that. I have read some poetry books, okay? My Storygraph is not gonna lie. Like, I have read poetry books. But it's hard for me to like begin to approach it. And maybe that is due to like my experience with poetry in the past. It's always been in an academic setting. I've rarely, when you're a kid, you read like the Shel Silverstein stuff and you read like Dr. Seuss, and that's fun poetry. But then you start getting into more like analysis poetry as you get into school and stuff. And of course you should, because that teaches kids, critical thinking and looking for metaphors, analogies, that whole like sort of thing. So I don't want to say it's like, it's not bad. It's just, I guess my association with it is just not making me inclined to really visit poetry books, even like when they get super popular, or like famous people write them. I mean, I know, well, it seems everyone wants to just pump out a poetry book, which is not fair to the genre. As much as I don't read it, it's not fair to just be like, oh, well, I can just write a poetry book. Poetry is a very specific thing, and you need to learn the steps, the patterns, the process, the structure, and I think it can get a little muddled up, and sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's more like, what's going on here? So I don't want to say it's always so crazy, but it definitely feels like a genre that lends itself more to like studying and analyzing than other books. That is not to say that like other books do not require you to analyze and think and interpret it and make, predictions, foreshadowing, whatever. It doesn't mean that that's not happening in everything you read. It's just, I think this goes back to how it was presented to me in a more educational setting, that it kind of turns you off of it because now like your brain associates it with studying and stuff. And I think that happens too with like classic novels. Like, yeah, I don't know how inclined I am in my 20s as someone who has completely graduated from all her schooling and stuff. How inclined am I to read a classic novel? Because I just think back to like high school English class, and you're sitting there and we gotta study it. But I know it is important still, and you should still be, obviously, as I said, you should still be analyzing and interpreting books and stuff. And I just think it's maybe there's some disconnect there. I feel like I want to relax more when I read, and I worry sometimes certain genres, such as poetry, don't always allow for that. And maybe that is just the poetry I have read. Perhaps I have not read any like fun poetry anymore. As I said, like when I was a kid, it felt like all the poetry was super fun, and it was fun to rhyme things, and it told silly stories. And maybe I got to get back to that. Maybe I got to reapproach this and not automatically dive into like super heavy like stuff right away. Or I just got to man up and start getting on my highlighters and take my time with it. Maybe there is something to be said about poetry maybe makes you slow down a bit, or even classic books in that sense makes you slow down a bit, because I think sometimes we do get into reading as perhaps more of a competition, especially if you're on social media with it and you just want to be finishing books and be showing your end of the year lists or your monthly recaps and look at all the books I read and look what I did here and look what I did, so I think sometimes there is a competition aspect that we need to slow down with, and maybe poetry can help with that. That being said, I do absolutely love novels in verse. If you've never read one of those, I would highly recommend a novel in verse. It is a story told through poetry, basically. It is a novel, as it implies, but it is verses of poetry that spell out the entire thing, and they are really phenomenal. They are quicker reads, I would kind of say, in a sense, than perhaps other poetry. Not to say, though, obviously, like They Are a Walk in the Park are super easy, because that doesn't, I don't think that's completely true too. They do still require you to take time and really think about them sometimes, but They have been fun. The ones I have read have mainly been for kids and young adults, but they've been really cool and they've been really interesting to read. And I would recommend a novel in verse. Do at least one and see if you really like it and kind of get into it. That is nice. So poetry, I guess we have a really complex situation, I would say. Poor poetry. My bad, girl. So shifting gears here, now we kind of go back into some other, I guess more fiction, traditional genres, maybe. Anyways, well, you can decide. My next genre that I seem to tend to avoid is historical fiction. That's may seem a little odd. I've certainly read some in the past. Specifically like romantic historical fiction. I do love a good historical romance. And I've read them from a couple different genre, or time periods, a couple different time periods. But it is something that I specifically come back to a specific era of historical romance. But when we think about historical fiction in general, I am just not too inclined to do it. I don't know why. I think this might be another one where school has impacted me, which is really unfortunate because I think reading in schools and being assigned reading is very important. Even though at the time, we all probably despised it. But it is very important to read a book, especially if you read a book with a bunch of people and be able to talk about it and really think about it and ask questions and analyze and annotate. It's important for critical thinking. There's nothing wrong with it. But I think sometimes it does impact us in ways that maybe our teachers don't intend and maybe in ways that may feel a little stupid, honestly. And so I do worry that's happening here with historical fiction. I did have to read some of it in middle school. And this ties back to my audiobooks issue, which I discussed, I believe, in my first episode. But we did have to read this one historical fiction book my history teacher made us read. I forgot pretty much everything about it, but I do just remember not liking it, and I did really well I did really bad on the test we had to take afterwards about the book. And I remember my teacher so specifically coming up and looking at my grade and being like, "You didn't pass." And it just was like something that just stuck with me. And I think maybe it had more to do with the audiobook thing than it did with the actual historical fiction genre, but it kind of turned me off, I think, for it. As much as I loved history, and I still do enjoy history, there was just something about it that I don't find myself coming back to. As I said, I love historical romances, so I'm definitely not opposed to anything historical, but I think it can, I don't know, I want to really get into them though. So I guess that is part of my thing is I don't want to rat on this genre because maybe in 6 months to a year from now, you'll find me obsessed and I'm reading everything and consuming it all. But I know for a fact I loved The Nightingale. I believe that's what it was called. By Kristen Hanna, The Nightingale. That was really good. I really thoroughly enjoyed that one. I remember that one making me cry. It was crazy. That one really got me. And it was a beautiful tale. It was beautifully done. It was not beautiful in the sense of wow, inspirational. It was very heart-wrenching. It was very much, but it was beautifully well done, I will definitely say. But I really enjoyed that one. So that was kind of, I guess, maybe my big welcome into more of historical fiction, feeling good. Like I said, historical romances, I can't rave about them enough. They're one of my definite favorites. I am picky with them though, so maybe that also stems from it too. I am very specific about the writing style of my historical romances, so that may translate too into historical fiction in general. And maybe this is a case where I kind of need to pick a time period that interests me. Maybe my conclusion to all of this is going to be that no genres do you want to avoid. You just got to find what speaks to you within that genre. Like in historical fiction, maybe I'm really intrigued by stories of the 50s as opposed to the 1600s or something, or vice versa. So there definitely could be more of an analysis need to be done here. And maybe I'll have that. Like I said, this is about genres I do avoid, but I want to try and want to really, really try to get into and really step my toes into. So I do hope that happens. I have high hopes for historical fiction. And please let me know, do you have any favorite historical fictions? Where should I start if this is your favorite genre of all times? If any of these are your favorite genres of all times, what am I missing? Please let me know. Please get me on the right path. I just want to love books, of course. Who doesn't? So anyways, this is going to be my last sort of genre. I did have difficulty, I felt, really collecting a lot of genres that I avoid because I do feel like I try to expand and I try to do whatnot. But the last one I could really settle on, and this maybe becomes a shocker as someone who you have heard me talk so much about romances. How many times can I say the word romance in one episode? It's crazy, but I avoid monster romances. And I should elaborate more on that because I don't avoid paranormal romances. So I am not opposed to stuff like I would consider like vampires into that sort of area. However, I have issues with like other sort of monstery kind of romance. I don't know how to really describe it. I guess it's like, well, I have in my notes here that I'm good with like human presenting monster romances. So I guess that would be like vampires. Like vampires can look like humans, but there is a paranormal aspect to that. I would even consider that like werewolves to be part of that kind of thing. I've never read any ghost romances, so you know what? Maybe I'll have to consider that. Maybe I'll have to consider that, ghost romances. But I do find myself more turned off by like physical monster, like aliens. Like I don't think I could read like an alien romance. I don't know if that would work. I will be honest though, I have read the genre before, but specifically I was reading a Mothman romance, and look, I am a girly who has grown up on the internet and has absolutely adored like paranormal discussions, mythical creatures discussions, urban legends, cryptids. I love learning about that stuff. I love it. It's like I love it so much. I love all that stuff. And so I do really get into the Mothman. I think Mothman is probably my favorite like cryptid. And I think he's fascinating as someone who is from the Midwest area. We do have some of the highest supposed sightings of Mothman. And I love that. I love learning about him, reading about him. And that led me to read a romance about him. And it was kind of fun. It was called I'm in Love with Mothman. There is 2 books in the series thus far, I believe. Maybe there might be a third one because the second one, it's a romance. So kind of goes a little further into it. But I did read that one, and that was what I would be considered more of a monster romance. And I read it kind of in some good fun just because I am someone who, at least with my friends, I am known as someone who loves Mothman. And, why wouldn't I read a Mothman romance? But it was kind of good fun, but it turned out to be really well written, really well done. I really enjoyed it. But that has been like it. I guess there has to be such a specific niche with the monster romance that maybe that niche was fulfilled by Mothman, but I don't know of anyone else who could maybe do it. I am more of a paranormal romance, and like I said, I love vampire romances. That's probably also one of my absolute favorite subgenres out there. I will read them all the time, anywhere whatsoever. But sometimes it does get a little out there for me, and maybe I just don't have the big enough imagination for it. I do admire these girls out here who, and maybe guys too, admire these readers out here who will dive into the very obscure monster romances and just enjoy it, just go at it, just have so much fun with it. And I might be a little jealous of that. I'll be honest. I want to be that adventurous with my romances, especially because I think it is such a genre that like it can go anywhere. You can kind of do anything. You can fall in love with anything within reason, as long as it is not not like almost illegal or anything. You know, we've had some issues definitely with the era stuff, but it is a genre where you can kind of have fun. And maybe I gotta loosen up a bit. I need to go a little bit more courageous with my romance reading. But yeah, so that kind of, I hope this was kind of interesting, kind of a work through genres. And this was kind of fun also to talk it out loud and really consider genres and why am I maybe avoidant to them? Is there a reason for it? What happens there? Why should I not? What could I do? Maybe I could start here or do that. So it was quite interesting to kind of work through. This has, I will be honest, this podcast has become maybe a little bit like super therapeutic, I would say, in helping me really kind of talk through and work through some things. I know that I get all over the place and I go off the rails. And like I said, I have an outline. So I am trying to stick to like topics and ideas. I'm not getting on here and just throwing out my entire life or whatever, but it's kind of fun to work through these books and at least, you know, consider them and where I'm at and what I'm doing and my reading habits. I definitely am someone who I want to be conscious of my reading habits and conscious of what I am avoiding, as you can see in this. I do figure out what I don't read and why would that be and what can I do to maybe fix it and at least broaden my horizons. I don't know if I'm going to walk away eventually and love all these genres and be like all gung-ho and be like, yep, this is it. I'm a champion for it. But if I'm able to expand my horizons at least maybe once a month or so, there's no harm in that. So I'm definitely going to keep this episode in like the back of my mind and kind of consider it as maybe an update, a follow-up. If anything does progress in this field and I do find myself really enjoying some titles from these various genres, or perhaps I think about it and I think about even more genres that I'm just like, can't do this, you know? So there's definitely, there's room here to grow, obviously. This should not be a stagnant thing. Your reading should not be stagnant, I don't think. I think everyone should be growing and finding themselves and figuring out what works for them and how they are spending their time and what they are consuming. So, but I hope you really enjoyed this. I hope you had fun kind of walking through this. I hope you consider it for yourself. Please, of course, let me know what's your take on these genres. Do you have any genres you avoid? Do you agree with any of my points? Did you hate any of my points? Please don't send me hate, but if you disagree with me, I am curious. Maybe perhaps I've taken stuff the wrong ways, or maybe I'm not being fair about something. That can always be the case. I definitely understand that. I try to be like super like, you know, casual with it, pretty straightforward, but everything I think can always take some more things into consideration. So of course it's a work in progress, but I still hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a wonderful day, week, whatever, whenever you're listening to this, whatever's going on. And so keep reading on.